Hello, everyone. Bonjour tout le monde, and welcome to Concordia University's Fourth Space. Thank you for joining us for research and conversation in the Faculty of Arts and Science. I'll pass it over to host Patrick Leroux and his special guest, Aphrodite Salas, in just a minute. But just to help situate you, we are streaming to YouTube live from Fourth Space, which is located here in Jojage on unceded Indigenous lands. And we'd like to extend our gratitude to the Kanyankahauga Nation, who are the caretakers for the lands and waters we are gathering on today, we're meeting on, for their teachings about the earth and our relations. At Fourth Space, we work with our university community to mobilize and exchange knowledge by co-creating and facilitating conversations such as these. So it's really our pleasure to host these research conversations with faculty members from the Faculty of Arts and Science, today being the second one. And I know Patrick will tell us that there's more upcoming in the coming months. But on that note, I'll pass it over to you, Patrick and Aphrodite. Welcome.
Thanks, Anna, and thanks to the entire Fourth Space team. This is incredible. We started these research and conversation exchanges, the series in the fall. We had 17 colleagues come speak basically about the research. This morning, we've already spoken with Gilbert Raymond and Sylvia Queiroz, and I have the immense pleasure of speaking with Aphrodite Salas right now, an assistant professor in journalism. Aphrodite, hi.
Hi, thank you for having me here today.
Thanks. And you can probably tell I'm sort of glowing from the pleasure of just having the privilege of sitting down with colleagues and just talking about their research, listening, trying to figure out what makes them tick at Concordia. And we really have had varied conversations, people coming from completely different angles, different perspectives. And I think this is the first time we're talking to a journalist. So I'm also intimidated right now because this is what you do naturally in life. And you should be interviewing someone else, but now we've flipped this around.
Right, so it's a little nerve-wracking now that you mention it that way.
So Aphrodite, you've worked as a journalist, a visual journalist, across Canada and around the world. I remember seeing you on TV and being surprised that you had decided to come into the university world, into the world of academia and scholarship, and yet you came with everything that you are and all of these experiences. You continue to do more than a reportage. They're the documentary films where you have time and resources that are also student driven, and we'll get to that in a moment. For those of you who don't know you, and there might be a few, but we've seen Aphrodite on CTV for a number of years. She was the senior anchor at Global Quebec, and for a while also hosted your own radio show.
Yes, with Dennis Trudeau as well for a point in time. It was great. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and a radio show that had to do with current affairs. Mm-hmm. Which is interesting because you studied political science here at Concordia, and before that at University of Toronto. And if I remember well, you also were a sessional teacher in political science before moving on to journalism. So you've had these extremely interesting, rich, diverse experiences within media, within academia, around the world as well. You worked in Africa as a correspondent as well, and Saskatoon. Mm-hmm. Let's be exotic.
Absolutely, love Saskatoon.
And what we've been impressed with, I guess, over the past few years is also the ability with which you've combined the university structure, scholarly research, and your innate, it seems, ability to connect with individuals, with community. You talked about recently documentary film that you did with the Northern community, and we'll get to that in a moment, which thoroughly impressed me. First question. How do you manage to sort of bridge these worlds? How did you go from broadcast journalism to to a more research-oriented journalism that basically you've created here, sort of co-creation of knowledge. We talked earlier about how to call this conversation, and you suggested from extractive to collaborative journalism. Is that what has been happening? Were you an extractive journalist, and now you're more of a collaborative journalist?
I think. Well, when I suggested the title, I think it was more global in terms of the thoughtful approach I'm trying to take with the research that I'm doing. But having practiced journalism for quite some time, and in kind of understanding the colonial structures of our society, absolutely, I would have practiced extractive journalism before. I mean, I've been working as a journalist since the late 90s. So, there, and I hope to say that, there's been an evolution. And that's what I'm working towards. I mean, you've asked a couple of questions, I think.
Sorry,
it's okay.
Very good of you.
I think ultimately, in terms of academia and media, right? It's very different worlds, very different worlds. But, I think as human beings, we are all kind of driven by different things at different times in our lives. I think that's important, to be philosophical, but what brings you meaning at different points in your life. If you have it's important to think of these things. You're also asking a Greek, right? So I'm also very philosophical in my approach when I can be. And so I started off as a journalist. I didn't know I was going to be a journalist when I was in my undergrad at the University of Toronto. I think I had this impression I wanted to go to law school or, perhaps eventually do my PhD. And so I knew that I wanted to keep learning, but it was a professor at the time, a writing course that I took. And these things this is why I love the university environment so much, because I know what certain professors did for me in my life, setting me on a particular path. And I see that I'm able to do that, or I have the resources to try to do that for others now. And that's a great joy. But this prof kind of identified that I had this, I was good at writing. That's what, my marks showed. And I progressed to kind of pursue what I thought could be a career. And then it just kind of took off. But I always had a foot in the university environment because I always taught one class as a part-time faculty member, not only at Concordia beginning in 2005, but also at the University of Western Ontario as well. When I was an anchor in Kitchener for CTV, I taught at the graduate school at Western for a class. So that kind of, and I knew that I wanted to come back at some point to hopefully contribute to scholarship in my professional area, which obviously was journalism and continues to be.
And so working in the more extractive mode, would you say this is time based because you're working on deadlines? You don't have very much time or resources to actually get the information.
No.
But in the university, you're on a different time scale.
Right. And so I have to say, not all daily news is like this.
Right.
So, but I would say the vast majority of daily news in the Western world is by nature extractive, in that you have to go, come back, produce on a very quick timeline. Yeah. That's the model, right? That doesn't lend itself to it does not lend itself easily to building relationships over time, to building trust. It can be done, and many reporters do an excellent job of that if they have a beat. If let's say they're on Parliament Hill or they're covering a particular subject or community, you're able to develop those relationships, but it's difficult. So in this environment at the university, that is a wonderful, wonderful thing, that time is something so valuable. And when you're doing long-term research, you have that time, and you can actually build relationships in a different way. It's not impossible to do that in mainstream media, but in this environment, with a media partner, it makes it so much, it's just so much more conducive to the kind of work that I'm trying to do.
Right. And that work, I have to mention the latest film, Inukjuak, right, which is absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. It is thought-provoking, and I'd like us to hear more about it. One thing that I noticed is its pace. The pace is very, very slow.
Yes.
And deliberate. You bring us into this world, and it takes time for us to find our way in that world, but we do. Can you talk about the process and how you did this and who you brought on that trip as well?
So just a word about the process, right? So when I came to Concordia as a full-time faculty member, it was 2 years after the TRC.
Okay.
So the TRC in 2015, the final report was issued. I came to Concordia full-time 2017, 2018. But in 2015, I had been following obviously what was happening, the commission. I was also very involved and continue to be very involved in the BAMP Forum policy conference, and had really been thinking a lot about the way non-Indigenous journalists interact with Indigenous peoples and communities, and had just been thinking about that for a long time anyway, professionally. But when the TRC final report came out and the calls to action came out, and I read the document, Call to Action 86 focuses on what journalism educators and journalism departments can do to contribute to reconciliation. I know that, and that word also is very loaded. And I want to note that I use that word in the spirit of how it was written about in the TRC. So the spirit of coming together in a spirit of healing, not the other definition, which of the word reconciliation, which gives this impression that you can return to something that was good in the past. That's not the definition I'm using. So I'm using the word in that way. And I sit here, as we heard the territorial acknowledgement earlier, and I'm a guest on this territory too, and so, and I want to do something meaningful to acknowledge that. That's how this research project was born. I began working with members of Indigenous Clean Energy, an amazing group headquartered in Ottawa, which works with Indigenous communities across our land to build clean energy projects. And I've worked with two communities extensively now. The one that you just mentioned was Inukjuak up north in Nunavik, an amazing community that almost 20 years ago started this process of thinking, how can we kind of get off diesel? Because we know diesel fuel is dirty, pollutes, it's bad for the environment, bad for all these things. And they, as showing great climate leadership, made the decision years and years ago to start looking at other options. So they did this over time. And I started speaking with community leaders there back in 2019 through Indigenous Clean Energy, and we were able to build this relationship. So even though I did take a small group of Concordia students in November of 2021, but the relationship had been building for 2 years before. Right. So there was a process, and this is what is different from daily journalism. So we had the great opportunity to speak many times with our main community resource person, Erica Tegutalik, who showed us an incredible amount of, just grace and bringing us on, meeting with us via Zoom, giving us sensitivity training that was similar to other, people who go up north in that particular community, so that we would understand the context, the cultural context, community context. And, taking 2 years to develop the relationship with people and to understand fully where we were going, what the context was, reading the TRC report, reading other reports, speaking to people and preparing, it gave, I think, myself and the students an opportunity to really think about what kind of journalism we were going to practice. How do we do this? And of course, we were focusing on a very positive story, this positive story of climate leadership. Right. So it's not just the process, but it was also very deliberate to choose a story of strength, of Inuit resilience, showing that here's an example of great leadership, and something that we can all learn from, right? How to make a difference in the space where you're living. So it was really a very slow, deliberate process. And we went up, we were welcomed by the community. It was really wonderful. And the thing is, we went up, yes, but we continue to speak. I was emailed with Eric earlier this week on, other things. Eric and Sarah Lisa, who are both featured in the documentary, came down and we all presented it together at COP15. At the Biodiversity UN conference here in Montreal in December.
So the world heard about this,
right?
This initiative.
And Indigenous Clean Energy actually screened it at COP27, Sharm el-Sheikh, Egypt as well. So just amplifying the climate leadership of this particular community was the journalistic aim. But the process, the journalism education aim on my part was really trying to see, how can we do this differently? And what effect does it have on the students and on the people who worked with us? That's the space where I'm in. So when I talk about extractive to collaborative, it's because we're really not doing things the way they've been done. Also recognizing that traditionally reporting on Indigenous communities really takes this conflict frame, and really taking care to reimagine the frame, listen and work together to share a story that is accurate, that is embraced by the community as well, that is representative and is theirs.
Right. And it clearly is theirs. You show an empowered community making a difference for themselves, but also giving us tools to do the same elsewhere.
Right.
Right. They build this hydroelectric dam for themselves.
Right.
And at the end of the documentary, they anticipate selling a lot of the excess energy to Hydro-Quebec. And is there eventually a follow-up story there?
Yes,
the real impacts, because you're in the anticipation of what's to come here.
Right.
How do you envisage that continued relationship? Because you mentioned this. You were there. It was a 2-year build-up. You're still in relationship with them. They've come here.
Right.
You presented this to COP. Do you feel a responsibility now to continue that relationship?
100%. I mean, that's what I think makes the difference. And I don't have all the answers, and I'm just one person working on this small project. But from what my students say, they loved the idea that they could take more time and care and learn and share together in this process.
Right.
60 students applied for 3 spots on my research team. 60. And we'll be going up again later in the year. That's the aim, to revisit.
Different students? Or
probably different ones, because now the ones that I had all got jobs in journalism. So they're, we achieved that at least, right? So they're working professionally and doing wonderfully well. And so, it'll be new students for sure, because we'll be going up, if everything goes well, then later this year to continue. But that's the idea. The idea is to build relationships and not just go somewhere, tell a story. That's the other thing too. It's, the language, I'm using the word sharing a story as opposed to telling a story, because that's what it is. You ask permission to share a story, not going in extractively take and then tell a story. It's not what we're doing. We're sharing. So what I'm doing is it started off as really this amazing research that I read about years ago, conciliatory journalism in Finland. But as the projects have been continuing, I note that we take some from the conciliatory journalism approach, but because we're here and things are a little different in Canada, the approach to different things, the collaborative approach is also coming through. There's been some writing about reconciliation journalism as well. So the process now is evolving. Mm-hmm. And that's what I find very exciting too about just the building of the relationships and moving forward in this way. Understanding that it takes time, but that investing the time also brings great reward.
Right. And you are absolutely practicing what you, I won't say preach, but you're practicing what you advocate with that documentary film. And I'd like to hear you maybe speak about the mentorship that you approached this with the students, and what can you tell us what the direct impacts might have been on those students as well?
Sure. Yeah. Yes. I mean, so I've done, so with the students in particular, I did extended interviews, so long form interviews, qualitative interviews before and after travel. And so I do know that all of them, and those were 3 students for this particular project, but I did do a project in 2018 with another community in Northern Ontario, and that involved 6 students at the time. So through these interviews, I've been able to understand that the students very much appreciate this process of learning. And I tell them, it's not just a trip when you apply. You're not just applying to take a trip. This is something different. This is, a long-term experience and approach that's going to ask you hard questions in your own mind about the way you approach your job, the way you approach talking to people, the way you approach information, and the way you acknowledge the gaps in your own knowledge. That too is important, I think, to have intellectual humility as you embark on this. So the 3 that I took, I'm just going to brag a little bit. Okay. So
please do.
Right, I have to, because I'm so proud of them. So Virginie Anne is now a full-time journalist for CBC in Whitehorse. She's doing wonderful work involving all kinds of news and people. She actually just put together a long-form project on an Indigenous community north of Whitehorse as well. So she wrote me a note 2 or 3 weeks ago and just said, I'm doing what we did. I'm doing what you taught me. And I can't even tell you how that made me feel, right? It made me feel so happy that she found meaning in the approach that we're taking and that she's growing that with new relationships in Whitehorse. Right. So I'm so proud of her. And Luca Caruso Moro is a full-time journalist at CTV Montreal, digital journalist. He's doing fantastic. He was the web designer for the whole project. So he created the amazing interface, and he also came on the first project in Northern Ontario. He just continues to do wonderful work, very thoughtful, and he was able to come to COP15. Virginie couldn't because she was in Whitehorse. And Kari Akwash was actually a graduate student and just defended his thesis at the end of December, and is working on a new film and just amazing as well. So it's very rewarding because I hope that they take the experience and continue to remember the importance of slow collaboration, respectful relationships, and that takes time to build. These things can't be rushed.
I'm very impressed with basically how you're turning these experiences into real learning opportunities, how you're sharing this passion, this knowledge, this very positive approach to journalism with the students. And you're very clearly self-reflective. So maybe it's because you have more time now because you're not rushing every 2 weeks to a new story.
Right.
Although being a professor is also running around as
right.
for different reasons.
But it's the reflection time,
Yeah,
right?
yeah.
So it's acknowledging that this project. So when you embark on it, when each project that I embark on, I recognize that this is if everything works well, it will be a multi-year relationship.
Okay. Yeah.
Knowing that.
Yeah.
So I also now I'm working with a new community in northern Manitoba, and that it's taking time to build, and knowing that the relationship will last for years and years. That's the hope, because then we can build something properly, and look at new ways of doing journalism and how we can do that better.
And I noticed that you're working on a book, Indigenous reporting for non-Indigenous journalists. So it sounds like you're actually channeling all of this knowledge and making it useful to others. How is that coming along? I'd like to hear your thoughts about that.
Right. I hope so. And that's it. But really, I want to underline the fact that I am learning too.
Right.
And that, so I don't have all the answers, but when my work is informed by other journalists, Indigenous journalists, Duncan McHugh of the CBC wrote an amazing book recently on decolonizing journalism education. And I've been so lucky to have many Indigenous partners, Patricia Elliott, Corey Wilson, my amazing friend, Daryl Brown, Kara Sanders. I mean, just so many people that have come together and said, you know what, we believe in building bridges. Let's do this together. So that's the only way forward, I think. And so I hope that this can help others kind of embark in the same space.
Right. And it's a very different project. This is written form, extremely self-reflective. You can't, basically you're outside of the usual visual references. Are you working on this alone or collaboratively?
So the way that came about, Routledge, so there's a book editor who had approached me after I made a presentation at an international conference a couple of years ago on journalism. And she approached me with this idea of potentially writing a book.
Right.
So I thought, wow, that's, I wasn't sure about it. This is about 2 years in the making. And we've gone back and forth. And right now I'm in the process of building this structure, the provisional structure.
Okay. Yeah.
But I'm doing it alone at the moment. And she's been a wonderful resource. Actually, I have a meeting with her coming up, and I would like to discuss some more collaborative. So it's all in the process. Yeah. But at the moment, it's just me.
Sorry, I've identified the one project.
Right. I'm like,
It's like talking to a doctoral student saying, so how's your dissertation coming along?
Right. Yeah. But also, I mean, the thing too, is that it's a process. Yeah. And so how do you put that together? I imagine I'll definitely be incorporating the views of my students, the views of my collaborators, because it's a very collaborative process.
Right.
So, it's not going to be a handbook, me telling you what to do. I think it would be me reflecting on the lessons learned, the lessons that I continue to learn, reflecting on what the students have learned thus far, and my collaborators as well. What worked, what didn't work. The other complicated thing too is that the pandemic really made things difficult for a few years. Luckily, I was able to continue building the relationships online and then go up. That was really lucky. But again, it's allowing for reflection. Sorry, I think I've lost my thread of.
I was just thinking about the fact that your usual approach would have to do with giving others voice, or giving, but allowing their voice to be heard, to shine. But a book project is finding your own voice as well. So it's a very different approach.
It's a very different approach. But I think, look, I never would have thought anybody would have wanted to read a book that I would write. But what I notice is the more I do the work and do the projects and build the relationships, people do reach out and say, I'd like to do something similar with a group here, or, and really it's the collaborators, Daryl Brown in Winnipeg, the first conversation we had was back in 2017 about all of this. He was on the board of Indigenous Clean Energy. That's how it all started. So it's really about a community of people across the country in different places that want to make things better. And in my case, it's making things better in journalism education. And I'm lucky enough to have partners and people that believe in that. Right.
You're also involved in a project called the Journalism for Human Rights, the Misinformation Project, which has pedagogical aims as well. But from what I understand, you're actually engaged in developing new projects there and outside of Canada. Could you tell us a bit about that?
Absolutely. So Journalists for Human Rights is an amazing organization headed up by Rachel Pulfer in Toronto, international organization. And a few years back, right before the pandemic, they began this Misinformation Project. So what is the Misinformation Project for JHR? It's a project where initially they had trainers train. I was part of the first cohort, so probably a dozen journalists or journalism educators across the country in media literacy. The idea was how to identify misinformation and disinformation online. Obviously, the tools and techniques change constantly, but with an aim at training journalists and journalism students. So in the course of your reporting, how can you verify information quickly? We're talking about images or videos, or, how do you kind of navigate this as well as report responsibly? So I was working as a trainer for them, I would say for a couple of years, and then began giving the same media literacy training to a group in Thessaloniki in Greece, the Aristotle University. They have a summer training program. So I started giving the training there, and then networks, right? I was invited by two groups one group in Ljubljana, Slovenia, and another group in Belgrade, Serbia last year, to also contribute with training journalists, particularly in Slovenia, from 6 Balkan countries and civil servants with some of the same techniques. So I adjusted some of the training, developed some new training, and gave those groups the training. And also now I'm working with MIGS as a faculty fellow. And that is actually, I'm also working with a student that I just recently hired to put together a series of podcasts on disinformation in Ukraine, and focusing on this area of misinformation and disinformation in Southeast Europe.
Right. And the situation in Ukraine obviously is extremely difficult. And I remember you had mentioned that you had gotten, involved in conversations with a professor or dean at Mariupol. Is that right?
Yes, exactly. So,
what came out of that?
Right, absolutely. So Svetlana is the dean of journalism at Mariupol University. Had to leave, obviously. I met her when I was giving the media literacy training last summer at Aristotle University. Right. And when I came back, we were able to continue the conversation, and she put me in touch with one of her students, which now that's what actually happened. So then the student that I hired, I put them together to have a conversation about exactly that, journalism in, being a journalism student in the middle of this war. What is that like? And so we are in the process of fleshing out a number of different themes to discuss, which, and then to develop these podcasts, themes like, what happens when disinformation, what kind of role does that play within families, right? When you have families that part are believing one thing, part are believing another, right? And how is that approach? So the work is quite interesting, in fact.
And this is, I guess families can be split along the lines of which media they're watching 100%. And consuming, and we know 100%. that. And working with a journalism student in Mariupol, which has been taken by the Russians, there's also a danger. There's real risk involved here. So how do you mitigate that? How do you engage with a journalism student without putting the risk, essentially?
So she had to leave Mariupol.
Okay.
And the conversations, obviously, they're on the phone.
Okay.
And Bogdan, actually, the student that's working with me, he's Ukrainian and speaks both Ukrainian and Russian.
Okay.
And so he's also been able to communicate in different ways. And in terms of, we have the conversations and really look for themes. That's the thing. In this particular case, we're doing longer conversations, and then being able to then reflect, okay, what do we pull out of that conversation in order to expand, depending on the theme. So we're hoping to do that work in the next couple of months, actually.
Right. So it's not
the conversations have already been done, though.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, he did the interviews. Yeah, in the November. Mm-hmm.
So you're not necessarily in the reporting relationship. This is more of a long-term thinking about what it means to be a journalist in that environment.
Right.
And what will come out of that? Is it like a series of conversations that can be followed as such? Or is it a podcast? Is it a documentary? What's the end?
So the end result, what we're aiming for is, so there's a couple of other interviews as well, including one with Craig Silverman, who's a graduate of Concordia University and an international misinformation expert. So we're looking at all the interviews now, and likely I would say it'll probably be a series of podcast episodes that we'll publish on the MIG's website and potentially as well the digital magazine in our Concordia department, journalism department. So I think that's what is going to be the output, and in the next couple of months.
Right. And do you write in a scholarly manner? Do you write learned articles describing that process?
That's the idea.
Or not? Or
That's
are you
the
really
idea.
involved in the...
That's the idea. The idea, so it's the process, right? So it's the process of understanding what, and because we're in the middle of the journalism work, that's the interesting thing about journalism research, what I do, research creation.
Yeah.
The creation is one thing, the research often comes after, right? So we can then look at the methods, look at the kind of how things were put together, reflect, do the qualitative interviews, look for themes, and then understand the lessons learned after the fact.
Yeah. So Aphrodite, you've opened a world of incredible possibilities in terms of research, in terms of real engagement with various communities around North America, Europe. You planted this image of you being basically everywhere. Oh
my gosh! Don't say that.
but especially reaching out to various communities, various voices that absolutely need to be heard and should be heard as well. I really thank you for the time you've given us. We could have gone on forever, but I got the little red carton a moment ago. Thank you so much, Aphrodite.
Thank you. Thank you for asking me to be here.
My pleasure.
If you have an idea for a podcast, please let us know. You can contact us by email at info.4@concordia.ca or find us on social media at CU Fourth Space. All social media is managed by Jacqueline Wexler. This episode of the Fourth Space podcast is hosted by me, Maximus Delmar, and produced by Anna Voklavek and Douglas Moffat. Editing by myself, Douglas Moffat, and Chanel Lees Marshall. Additional thanks to Supercontinent for providing our theme music. Thanks for listening.